Hi, welcome to this video on question 5 of the EDUQAS GCSE English Language Paper 2. This is looking at the first comparison question. There's two comparisons in the exam. This is question 5, and this is explain what we learned about the food Scott and Fogle took with them on their expeditions to the South Pole. So there you go. It's the last but one penultimate question in the exam. This is the first of two comparison questions where you'll be looking at both texts in the exam. So tips for this question: it's the first compare question. It's worth 4 marks. It's only worth 4 marks, so we're not spending loads of time on it. So we need to make 2 points really, but we need quotes for each one. So we need a quote and explanation for each extract for each point. What do you need to avoid? Terminology, lengthy explanation. So basically what that means is we're not saying things like the adjective is used, the verb is used, the metaphor, and we're not doing point, evidence, explain. So we're not making a point and then explaining why the writer has used this language. It's almost like an information retrieval question really, looking at both texts. So again, the question is, look at both texts, explain what we learn about the food Scott and Fogle took them on their expeditions. So this question wants you to synthesize information from two texts. This means you must read both texts carefully, find and then combine the information required in your answer. Like I said, it's worth 4 marks, so we should be spending 5 to 6 minutes on it. How many points and quotes do you need to use? We need to make 2 points with a quote from both extracts on each. So the question is basically looking at you identifying basic similarities and differences. In the 10-mark question for question 6, you're going to be comparing in a bit more detail and analysing the language. But this for question 5, you're identifying basic similarities and differences. So like I just said, you can say both texts are the same or different. Don't just get into the habit of saying things are the same. If things are different, you comment on that too. And be clear which text you're talking about. There's nothing really more annoying than you working really hard, but if you haven't put which text it's from, you're not going to get marks. So a really obvious one to do with this one is just call it by the writer's surname. So it's Scott and Fogle. So each time you're talking about the quote, just say Scott Fogle. So like I said earlier, terminology is not needed. So if you want to shove it in, because you find it easy, then it's fine. But if you struggle with it, if it's going to take you a bit of time, I wouldn't bother with it too much. Okay, so similar or different. So things that we can comment on in this question are similar or different, these things. So are they similar and different about the ideas talked about, the point of view, the language used, structure. So you can look at both the text here, and if you want the exam question, I will put the link to a copy of the exam question in the comment on the description on the YouTube video. Also, if you went into Google and typed in EDUQAS Ben Fogle, I'm sure you could get it. So you can look at both extracts, and then you're going to track through both texts, so go from top to bottom, and I want you to look for key parts about the question. So basically, any time it mentions food on the trip, and highlight those key points. So here's both extracts again. Here's the Fogle one, the Ben Fogle. So you're going to look through this text and track through it and highlight key points. So really, it's only in this top section here. So let's zoom in on this section. So here's what it says about the food. Okay, so here's the stuff it says. So basically, to sum up, it says that they enjoyed the food. So they enjoyed the breakfast from Ben Fogle. That they had lots of food. So they had salami, chocolate, cheese, jelly babies, sour chicken, spaghetti, bolognese, spicy mince, fish pie. They also say that when they added the water with powder, they had powdered food, that people in the UK would think it was disgusting. But they also say to them it was like heaven, so they really enjoyed it. That's what the Ben Fogle text said. So now if we look at the Captain Scott extract, that's the whole text. This one, it's a bit more spread out. So here's the main parts. But to sum up, they said they had a thin breakfast, meaning they had a small breakfast, hardly had anything. They didn't have a lot of food, so that's different to the Ben Fogle one. They both had sugar, so they both had sugar to pep themselves up. And they also said here that they used it to, so a bit like Ben Fogle, they said they enjoyed it. Here, Scott says they used it to raise their spirits. So they were in a bad mood, but they actually used their supper really to pep them up. They raised their spirits, they boosted their morale. So we use this table. Did they have a lot of food? What did they have? Did food give them enjoyment? Any other similarities or difference? Pause the video, see if you can answer these questions. Okay, so first of all, did they have a lot of food? Ben Fogle, yes. Captain Scott, they didn't have much, and what they did, they had the ration. so they had to save. What food did they have? Ben Fogle, they had porridge, chocolate, chicken, spag bowl, mince, rice and other things. Captain Scott, what did they have? They had sort of biscuits, horse meat, pemmican, dried beef, but they had to ration these. They were coming out to their last supply of them. Did food give them enjoyment? So both said yes, so that's a similar thing. Ben Fogle said yes, they enjoyed the breakfast and it was food from heaven. And Captain Scott said although they didn't have a lot of food, it raised their spirits, they enjoyed it. Any other similarities or differences? Well, generally they had different experiences with food because basically one had lots and one didn't have the other. So they didn't have that in common, however they both enjoyed the food and they both had sugar. And there it's together. So my red is what they didn't have in common. So they didn't have in common how much they had. They didn't have in common their different experiences. But the blue is what they did have in common. So that's what they had, and they both enjoyed the food and both had sugar. Okay, so maybe if you're in the exam and you're just with a pen, you could do, excuse my messiness, you could just do this on like a little bit of the exam paper. So all I've done is put one extract on one side, Fogle on the left, Scott on the right, and just the main point. So Fogle, lots of food, Scott, not a lot. Fogle enjoyed the food, Scott enjoyed the food. Fogle, porridge, chocolate, chicken, mince, Scott, biscuits, meat. So I've just listed the food. So maybe if you just, instead of like highlighting, if you did that on your exam paper, maybe that would make you obvious and it'd be quite easy for you to pick out what was the same and what was the difference. So how are we going to structure the answer? So that's the main thing. How are we going to get this down on the page? So let's look at structure. So first of all, you need to start off with an overview. So your first sentence should be, as a whole, what is the main thing? So do both texts agree about the food, or do both texts maybe differ about the food? So I think, then you need a quote from extract 1, then you need a quote from extract 2, and then also if we think of another point to say, another thing that both texts agree with or disagree with, and then a quote from each one. So my overview, I'm going to use the sentence starter both writers, and I'm going to say something about that. So then give your overview, main point summary of the question. So my main thing is, I think both writers have different experiences with the food on the expedition. So I've used the exam question with the food on the expedition for my first sentence. So I'm saying my main overview is both writers have different experiences with the food. Then I'm going to say a short quote from both extracts to prove this. So I've got my sentence starters, now I'm going to give a short quote from both to prove that they have different experiences. So Fogle had lots of food. Quote to prove it: salami, chocolate, cheese, chicken, spaghetti bolognese. Then I need my quote from Scott. In contrast, Scott had rationed meat, biscuits and a thin breakfast. If you wanted to go in detail and talk about thin, you could do. Look how I've put purple in contrast. I'm going to talk about that in a second. So all I've done is my overview, said they have different experiences, and then I've said, then I've proved it. Fogle had lots of food. Quote. Scott had hardly any food. Quote. Okay, then there it is together. So both writers have different experiences with the food on the expedition. Fogle had lots of food: salami, chocolate, cheese, chicken, spaghetti bolognese. In contrast, Scott had rationed meat, biscuits and a thin breakfast. Really clear, really easy. So want to get high marks, use adverbials. Okay, so these are things like simile, on the other hand, likewise, in contrast. So remember, we are saying what is the difference and what is a similarity. So using these will show the examiner you thought about what is the same, what is the difference, that you've picked up on the subtle differences and similarities in the texts. So let's see if we can do another point. So my other point is that if we looked at our little plan, similarity is that they were both quite positive about the food. So my little sentence starter, in both texts food brings a positivity to the expedition to the men. Now I need to prove it. Fogle enjoyed the breakfast. Scott said it raised the spirits. So there's my answer. And there it is together. So my point is they were positive. My quote is Fogle enjoyed it. Scott said it raised the spirits. I don't need to go into a lengthy explanation. I've given my quotes and I proved to the examiner that I've picked two things out from the two extracts. Do a finish with a little summing up sentence. Only if you have time. If you're struggling, don't do it. So all I'm doing is summing up my answer really. So in summary, although the pair had different amounts of food, they both enjoyed the small relief it brought them on their traffic journey. So again, I read into the factors that even though they had a really bleak mood, the food actually helped them in some way. Okay, so there we go. So here it all is together. Both writers had different experiences with the food on the expedition. Fogle had lots of food. In contrast, Scott had a rationed meat, biscuits and a thin breakfast. In both texts, food brings a positivity to the expedition. Fogle enjoyed the breakfast. Scott said it raised the spirits. In summary, Although the pair had different amounts of food, they both enjoyed the small relief it brought them on their traumatic journeys. So we just take away that bit because we don't necessarily need that. It'd be good to do. We don't have to do it. I've shown here that I've picked out two things. I've said one similarity, one difference they have, and I've got quotes from etc. to prove that. I've picked out basic information. Remember, that's what we wanted. I've picked out basic information from two separate texts, and I put it into my answer. So again, summary of the whole question then, tips. It's the first compare question. It's worth 4 marks. Remember, don't spend a lot of time on it. 5 or 6 minutes. How many points should you make? 2 separate points and give quotes for each one. And what do we need to avoid? Terminology and lengthy exploration. So we're not doing PE. So follow this and hopefully you'll do well on this question. You'll have a successful grade for question 5 of the paper 2 exam.